Hi, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes here, and now that we've talked about analysis and analytics, really focus in on the two main groups in defense and security we're going to be focused on, which is going to be Department of Defense and the intelligence community, the IC. So I'll walk through just a real basic primer. If you've been in the service before, I'm sure this is going to be super boring, but for those who haven't, I just want to go through and make sure we understand what we're really talking about here in terms of the missions. So let's go ahead and get started on walking through this. All right, the mission of the Department of Defense. Department of Defense is there to provide the military forces needed to deter war and protect the security of our country. That's what they do. I threw a couple of facts out here just to get a context of what we're talking about. It is a $700 billion budget annually, the single largest line item in the U.S. Budget. It is roughly 2.9, so almost 3 million personnel are involved in what we're talking about here. 730,000 civilian employees as a part of the Department of Defense. And it's present in 160 different countries. So we think about the U.S. Department of Defense, but really it's all around the globe, located around the globe at 4,800 defense sites. So think about that in terms of data and in terms of what we're trying to execute on overall for mission. The forces are broken up into services. So each of these services, each of these forces provides the armed forces necessary to execute missions in peace and war. So the Army, Marine Corps, the Navy, Air Force, National Guard, Coast Guard, and now Space Force all have a responsibility to provide armed forces for their particular scope. Okay, that's their role, and that's why they're separate organizations, because they provide different kinds of armed forces. We're also separated into commands then. So each of the commands has a functional or geographic mission that provides command and control of military forces from those services, from those different forces in peace and war over a different sort of area of responsibility. So Africa Command, Africa, and they're listed in kind of alphabetical order here, is responsible for operations of all those forces over Africa. Central Command, generally you're looking at Middle East, those kinds of areas. Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, everyone, all the services in that command area. So that's had a lot of activity in the last 30 years, Afghanistan, Iraq. Cyber Command takes those services and employs their capabilities relative to the world of cyber and the networks across the globe. European Command, as obviously in European, Indo-Pacific. Northern Command is generally looking at, so Canada, the United States, Mexico, northern operations like that. So a lot of integration with DHS, but also a lot of integration, a lot of the missile defense kinds of situations and what used to be Strategic Air Command. Southern Command, obviously looking at South America. Space Command, all the space forces, all the operations that are focused on the space domain. Special Operations Command is a little bit different because it reaches across and does, from all the services, the special operations groups that do particular functions for those services are brought in under Special Operations Command. Then Strategic Command and Transportation Command. Transportation Command really looks at how do we support logistically all the services and all the other commands with operations. Different missions for data within all these. So you're going to think that you're using data to do a lot of the planning. You're using data to do a lot of the wargaming. I put wargaming there, but really it's a lot of strategy, a lot of understanding how we would best use tactics and ConOps. All of that has to be data driven, right? So we're making better assumptions and making better utilization of our forces as we go forward, both from a planning perspective, which then is going to lead into strategic deployment. It's also going to lead into acquisition, and it's going to lead into where we decide to spend our money on resources within the department. The data needs are going to be different, so we need to understand our own forces, our allied forces. We also need data to help us understand our threats and opposing forces. And on the left, we kind of got the descriptions there of what you're going to capture in terms of data. Our own capabilities, our capacity, our strategic position, our tactical position of forces, the health of our services and the servicemen and women there, the equipment, remaining life of equipment, what we have in stock and stores. And on the threats, the same kinds of things. We want to know their capabilities and their capacity, their positions, both strategic and tactical, and then what they have in terms of stock and stores for munitions and other sorts of logistics kinds of things. So what sources do we use for those? Well, for the U.S. and allied forces, we'll have our engineering data, our deployment information, all the information that we know we can get after. We'll also be able to capture our own Blue Force communications for tactical position, our operational data for the health of our forces, both in terms of our equipment and in our materiel and our personnel. And then remaining life, a lot of times what we're doing here is instead of just understanding how long something will last, you try to predict how long it's going to last and understand what the logistics chain is going to be for that. And the stores in terms of what do we actually have in terms of inventory. Opposing forces, the sources we're going to gather from those are what we're going to talk about in the second week on collection. But what we're looking at here are different intelligence capabilities that can gather us a lot of data. So for capabilities, you want to use your measure in intelligence, human intelligence, those kinds of things to understand kind of what we're going up against. The capacity, a lot of times your economic and strategic intelligence will give you that information. And then when you get into strategic and tactical positions, you're getting into more technical sort of intelligence sources. Now, again, we'll talk about more next week. And then stock and stores, there's ways that you can get into other sources to say, well, what do we think they have in terms of their overall stock of munitions and capabilities? Where do they think they're stored? How are they being moved around? All that kind of intelligence can be gathered through different sources. What about big data? Which of those are actually big data? Well, when you look at it, there's a lot of information that we just gather. And there's some of them, including their operational data and equipment remaining alive and those kinds of things that really can be gathered now through major large collections of data sources, sensor data, that you can now use modern techniques to go across and utilize and come out with information on. So a lot of that really is on our own forces and understanding and being able to use data to capture what we're doing and be able to make better decisions for our own forces being able to deploy. There are other, from an intel side, you might use those kinds of big data sources on communications and use what we would do for the, say, the NSA, try to capture communications and then use some of your analytics techniques to dig into those and try to figure out what is happening from a tactical position standpoint or a strategic standpoint. So jumping over then to the IC, the intelligence community's mission is to collect, analyze, and deliver foreign intelligence and counterintelligence information to America's leaders so they can make sound decisions to protect the country. That is the mission of the IC. All those different organizations, customers include the president, policymakers, law enforcement, and the military. So think about that when we're going through and talking about the data sources and what we're trying to capture. What they're trying to get is information, intelligence, so that our leaders can make the best decisions possible. That's why there is a lead for national intelligence that goes across the DNI goes across the entire IC, right? That's the person that's supposed to be gathering all this information post 9/11, making sure that these organizations are talking to each other enough that they are combining information, synthesizing information, and giving that information to policymakers. Data needs that you're going to have really focused into these two areas. So you've got foreign intelligence and counterintelligence, and you're going to be gathering economic activity, geographic activity, defense posture, and political decisions. That's what they're looking for. The means to gather those information are going to be signals, communication collection, which again is going to be big data analytics, geospatial imagery. So think about your satellite imagery, your other collection techniques from high altitude. Those are big data analytics techniques. And your communication internet activities, sorting through everything that we can capture to see what's going on, as well as the human sources, which is just basic analysis. The IC community, including the armed forces elements of the IC, which each of them does have some element included in there, is going to generally leverage big data and analytics more in their mission on a day-to-day basis than what you see in the DoD. But the DoD is a much bigger operation, and they still use a lot of analytics, even on their own Blue Force deployment and understanding the strategies that we need to deploy. So those are kind of a big bones look at it, and we'll go a little bit more into the IC and the collection side next week. Talk about some of the different major organizations that do some of this.